This is an open letter to USDA of Halifax, North Carolina. Because I had promised Mr. John Moore, who at that time was the editor of the Daily Hero here in Pornographics, and Miss Della Rose, I promised them that I wouldn't stop until I got some answers from USDA. On 8/23/06, I applied for a loan and grant from USDA here in Halifax. On 6/11/07, I got a letter wanting to know if I was still interested in the grant and the loan. I filled it out and I sent it back in. On 6/14/07, I got a letter letting me know that the loan and the grant was still active. On 4/14/09, I got a letter letting me know that the loan and the grant had been approved. But the approval date on the grant was 11/2/06. On 4/28/09, I got a letter letting me know that I could have the contractor of my choice to do the work on my house. On 4/30/09, Miss Patterson and one of her contractors came by the house. Mr. Bennett came by the house, looked at the house, and on their way leaving, Miss Patterson mentioned that she was going to go by a certain company and get them to come do some work for me. I asked her nicely, I said, Miss Patterson, if you don't mind, I don't want that company to do the work for me. She said, what? I said, no ma'am, and I explained why. And she said, well, yeah, you can't, She said, well, it's your choice. I said, yes ma'am. Thank you. So on 5/1/09, which is the very next day, I called Miss Patterson and I asked her, I said, Miss Patterson, I know you're in charge and everything. I said, but what about me using my own contractor? Her words were, no, you can't do that. And I said, are you sure? She says, yeah, you can, but they got to be licensed. I said, yes ma'am, thank you. On 5/05/09, I called B&C Construction. They came out, looked over everything. I explained to them what I wanted done. They agreed to it and everything. And when they called Miss Patterson, they were turned down. On 5/14/09, I called Mr. Jenkins out here. He looked over everything, went over everything, talked to me, and we went over the prices and everything. And he was turned down. And in 5/21/09, I called Timmy Smith from Gainsborough, and he called her, and he was turned down also. Well, anyone that knows me can tell you that my antenna is never all the way down. And when Miss Patterson told me that I couldn't have my own contractor, it just went up a little higher. Okay, so on 5/29/09, her contractor, Sean Smith from S&J out of Raleigh, we met in her office. And the development plan that she had was already made up. These are the prices that I signed for. And the reason why I signed it is because the contractor's name is, in other words, Sean Smith's name is not on this anywhere. That's one of the main reasons why I signed. After looking at the prices, after looking at these prices, this is what it was supposed to have been changed to. Miss Patterson told me that she would change it, bring it out to the house, and also the contract. But the contract I signed in her office only had 4 pages to it. Remember, my antenna went up a little higher. So I'm counting everything, and, you know, when I signed that contract, there was only 4 pages to it. You can look at my paperwork and see that. You can't look at her paperwork and see it, but you can look at my paperwork and see it because I have the original. And you can see that the front page, the staples were taken out of the back 4 pages. The front page was put on it, stapled together, and she called that law. How can that be? On 6/15/09, I went to Miss Patterson's office, and I wanted to know why. And Miss Patterson told me that I was a man that hated women and a whole bunch of other stuff, and I don't know why, because I disagreed with her on who was going to do my septic system. Anyway, on 7/2/09, I got a letter from the payment center with the coupon in it. Well, 7/10/09, I sent a notarized letter to Miss Patterson letting her know about the conditions of the work here, such as the vinyl siding coming loose, and the locks not being in the doors, and the window placed in the wrong position. On 7/20/09, I called the Consumer Protection Division. On 7/23/09, I sent another notarized letter to Halifax, letting Miss Patterson know that I was going to take her to court if I couldn't get any satisfaction out of this. On 8/10/09, I got a default payment check. Well, if I got a default payment check, how can that be when I gave her, right here in this house, I gave her check number 1001 to put on an automatic pay, and she didn't do that. I checked with the bank, and this check has never been turned in. If it had been, I wouldn't have got a default payment. On 8/27/09, I got a letter from Miss Patterson stating something about I told the men to leave in the 16th of June or 15th of June when I was in her office, which is bogus. I didn't tell them to leave in June, but I did tell them to leave, because after they stapled down that floor in the kitchen, I knew that they didn't know what they were doing. On 8/31/09, I called Mr. Ellis in Raleigh. Okay, and I called Miss Barbara Breed Hinton from Henderson. And she told me she was going to send somebody out here. And she did. On 9/10/09, Miss Alexander from Halifax and a fellow from Henderson, all I can remember is Chuck. They came out here, they looked, they walked across the floor, they saw the vinyl siding falling off. Did nothing. In other words, told me that they would set me up a meeting in Halifax. And now let me tell you like this. For the meeting in Halifax, I told him, I said, look, I know y'all got all the time in the world. I sing with a gospel group, the Royal Jubilee. And I said, if you don't mind, we have rehearsals on Thursday at 12 o'clock. Would you please set the meeting up whereas it wouldn't interfere with my rehearsal? Well, I don't have to tell you, the meeting was set up for 12 o'clock. I mean, I'm sorry, for 1 o'clock on Thursday. Okay? On 9/17/09, which is the meeting, we met in her office in Halifax. And the fellow from Henderson, a fellow named Chuck, told me like this. He said, Mr. Johnston, he said, what's going on out there at your place? I said, I can live with that. I want to know how is it he can live with it, and I don't see him around here nowhere. I live at 276 Summit Road, not him. Okay? On 10/2/09, I paid the default payment, and I paid it with a money order, but I sent in a voided check. The voided check number was 1004. Okay, on 12/17/09, I sent I went to talk to the magistrate Whitaker, there in Halifax. I talked to her, and she told me that if I could get any invoices or anything, you know, that she probably could do something with it. 3 notarized letters to Miss Patterson in Halifax, and I haven't received any invoices yet. The only invoice that I could receive was one for the septic system. On 1/12/09, well, that was the latest thing about the invoices. Okay, on 1/14/10, I called Miss Della Batts at that time. Miss Della Rose called. Well, I had talked to Mr. John Moore from the Daily Herald. I had talked to him, and he told me, Mr. Johnston, said, I know it's going to be hard. Said, you're going to run into a lot of roadblocks, but please don't quit, because you and a lot of people right here in Halifax County is the one that's suffering. And I promised him that I wouldn't quit. Okay, on 1/14/09, I called Mr. George Vitale, talked to him, because they changed Miss Hinton. She went to Raleigh, I think, and Mr. Vitale, he's the one that took over in Henderson. Okay. On 1/19/10, I received voicemail from Mr. Vitale. Okay. And 1/26/2010, Mr. Vitale and his assistant showed up. And I tried to show Mr. Vitale my paperwork. He refused to look at it. He told me he only came to take pictures, and that was it. He didn't want to get involved in the other stuff. Okay, so at 2/1/10, I called the DA's office here in Halifax, and they referred me to the sheriff's department. On 2/2/10, I called the sheriff's department, and a fellow named officer named Justin Matthews, he showed up, and I showed him my paperwork, and his question was, how did he know that I didn't arrange the papers like this? Well, Mr. Matthews, not trying to be smart, but if I had arranged the papers like this, why would I be complaining about it? That would verify the very first thing that I'm complaining about. On 2/10/10, I called the Legal Aid of North Carolina. On 2/15/10, I had pictures of the house made. I called Mrs. Linda Matthews from the Justice Department. 3/15/10, I called, sent Miss Linda Matthews a letter. And 3/19/10, I talked to Miss Laura Butler from Legal Aid. And 3/2/10, Mr. Leon King, the Intake Division from Raleigh, from Washington, D.C., complaint number 10-3697.